All right, Neil, it's a real honor to be here. My name is John Entwistle. I'm Dennis Peron's husband, calling the late Dennis Peron's husband. And I'm online here from San Francisco, California at the Castro Castle. And the castle, we've kind of, we celebrate history here. We also work to change the future and to advocate for better marijuana policies going forward. But we also celebrate history in a big way here. And we try to remember where we came from. And so, the castle as a whole is dedicated to the whole story. We've got 50 years of history on the wall. And I don't think I'm going to walk you through all of that right here today, but there's one or two characters, the cats, I wanted to tell you about that matter because of their story. The first is this gentleman up here. We drew his picture on the wall. He's actually still alive today. He's a great guy. His name is John Sinclair, and he lives in Detroit, Michigan. And the reason John's on the wall here is because he illustrates how bad it was once upon a time in America. John's big mistake, John back in 1967, 68, back in that dark ages, he gave 2 joints to a narcotics agent in Detroit. And he's told the guy, he just gave it to him, here, brother, have a better life. This is good stuff. You'll enjoy it. This will be good for you. Here, I want you to have this. Just the spirit of sharing a good thing. The man was a narc. It was a serious felony to distribute cannabis in Detroit back in 1967. John Sinclair was arrested. He was tried in a court of law and sentenced to 10 years in prison. 10 years in prison for giving a guy 2 joints. And that's the story. This is where we come from. When you take the unbridled hatred that we have been up against all these years, it's a deep, deep pit we're digging our way out of. There's another gentleman, and you can barely see the story on the wall behind me here, but it's a guy named Lowell Eggermeyer. And his story started about a week before the Beatles landed in America. He was a feller in San Francisco, just an ordinary guy, and has been all his life, actually. And he was smoking a joint one day, and he just realized, these pot laws are absolutely terrible. They're devastating and bad. And at that time, it was a felony to smoke a joint or have a joint in California. And Lowell decided to challenge that directly as a citizen and an activist and an idealist. And he walked into the police station, asked if he could speak to one of the main detectives there, somebody important, and got access to the gentleman's office, went into the officer's space and, shook hands, said, "I'm Lowell Eggermeyer. I'm here to challenge the cannabis laws in California. I think this is really wrong. And I'd like to start off by, getting some time in court." And to do this, he immediately lit and smoked a joint right there in the middle of the police station, in the middle of that officer's office. Needless to say, Lowell was arrested there. He got his trial. He got his court date, and they gave him a year. They gave him a year for smoking a joint in the police station, a year in what was clearly a political protest. That couldn't have been more clear. Lowell's case is particularly interesting for 2 reasons. One is it underscores once again, how terrible it is. These laws are no joke. I mean, they take you out of your life, throw you in jail for an entire year because you smoked a joint in a political protest against a bad law. But beyond that, Lowell's case was particularly interesting because it caught the eye of a lot of people. His attorney, for example, was shocked at the outcome. The guy knew it was a law, but, et cetera, but he didn't expect his client to get a year in jail for what was, an honest effort to address an injustice. And so he started a group called LEMAR, Legalized Marijuana, which was actually technically one of the very first organized legalization efforts in the United States. LEMAR came out of San Francisco, but it immediately went nationwide. The Beats took it all over the place. Allen Ginsberg himself became a champion for LEMAR. LEMAR was a small group. They moved on, morphed a few times, and but the effort that's where the seed was planted. And that was where the seed was planted that eventually led to legalization in California. Now, I'm going to move my camera here for just a moment here. So I can sit down and relax. So this gives you, I brought those 2 gentlemen up in that story, and their stories go on, but I brought them up for a very specific reason, and that was to illustrate the dark ages and how dark it was where we came from. And all of us have stories. Anyone that's been back there in those days has stories of how difficult it was. So we have no monopoly on that, and I won't waste your time on that. But going forward, the question is, how do we change this? How do we change this? Now, there's been a couple of times that are worth knowing about because we came very, very close. Once was in the early 1970s under the Jimmy Carter administration. That was, Carter, okay, we're talking way back then. And Carter was going to do it. His drug czar was a guy named Peter Bourne, and he was going to legalize pot. And the problem came up, and this is how delicate these things are and how careful we have to be. We really were closer than we've ever been, even now almost, to, in fact, now for real, to actually rescheduling cannabis so that people could use it. Jimmy was going to do the right thing. His drug czar was 100% committed to doing this. And what do you think could possibly go wrong? It's insane. Peter Bourne went to a party at the normal party in Washington, D.C., the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And most of those guys are pot lawyers. They're all pot lawyers. It's a professional organization of cannabis lawyers. And, and back in the 1970s, people were doing a lot of things. In fact, it kind of was a game of how you can alter your consciousness by doing a lot of things at the same time. So it was a game and everybody was playing it. It was innocent enough, but it got out of hand at that party. And a couple of the guys stepped into the back room and did some cocaine. And Peter Bourne was one of those guys. And then after that, instead of keeping really quiet, the guys from Normal went around bragging about how they'd been doing lines of cocaine with the drug czar. That was the end of that. There was no way Jimmy, the man moved on immediately. Jimmy never looked at the issue of legalization again. They cornered him. I mean, he was going to do the right thing for cannabis, and suddenly his drug czar gets caught, doing cocaine. And that was our guys trying to, leak that story out and let it be known, and then just destroyed the effort. And, for 30, 40, for all time to come. And that's how close we came on that. So, there's a real cautionary tale here. You can be very close and not get there. Here's another story. And this one's really an interesting one, and very informative to our times as well. LV Musica is, and there was 12 other, maybe 14 other people, but LV is my favorite because she's always out there running around now and just is a wonderful person. But they were all great. All these people were great, and I knew a lot of them. And these guys were the ones that took the cannabis through the IND program, the Investigational New Drug Program. And they did this during the 80s. And what you got to know about the IND program is that it was designed to exclude cannabis. Right from its inception, these guys were like, we're going to make sure that pot never gets through this program. This program is for new drugs. It's for pharmaceutical companies. It's for specific reasons. It's a safety valve, but it's not for these, it's not for cannabis. And so they'd set the rules up, and it was pretty strict. You have to, if you wanted to try a new drug for an existing ailment, let's say glaucoma, the first thing you had to do was go out and you had to try all the other potential cures for glaucoma first. And you had to prove, your doctor had to certify that none of the existing cures worked for you. Only then could you get access to cannabis through this program. And as short as that is to say, it's almost impossible to do. And a number of patients, notably patients presenting with AIDS, with cancer, with glaucoma, and I believe there was a multiple sclerosis case in there as well, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Anyway, they worked for years at this, and they in all cases, 14, maybe 20 people, 15 people maybe got through the program. And they did this under the, I believe it was Reagan, maybe it was Bush administration. I believe it was Bush, actually, Bush Senior. And when that got out, it was national news. And it could have been, once again, the beginning of that could have been the beginning of the medical marijuana movement for real in America. That could have been the landslide where, just millions of Americans suddenly gained medical access to cannabis because these guys had made the touchdown. They'd shown the way there. And it was pretty clear where this was going to go past that point. the government would have to supply them with cannabis. To this day, the government supplies LV Musica, although I believe she recently just told them to stop sending it to her. It's such low quality, she got sick of it. But the point is that the commitment was lasting. And so that happened. But once again, for what happened there? What happened there was that, realizing this fact, George, the president, called down to the guys, the scientists down there running the IND program, and he told them in straight up, he says, "This is the president of the United States, and I'm ordering you to stop that right now. Just stop." And they said, "But sir, we've legally grandfathered these people in. I mean, at the point we've put 14, 15 people in the program, we can never take this away from them. That was the deal we signed. We have to give them pot forever." He said, "Okay, good for it, but don't put any more people through that program. It's closed for pot. It is technically legally closed for pot from now on." Which gives you an idea of how political the IND program is. And that is the same program that just approved some recent vaccines that are a lot of people are discussing in the news. So, there's some interesting history there. And once again, and then the 14 or 15 people were great folks, but they were unable to command the media past a certain point and to get the story out more broadly and to connect the dots on the big picture. That came a little bit later. And that's where I want to take a pause here for just 1 second, grab my coffee. And then I want to talk a little bit about what went right in our movement. Where did we hit it out of the park? What was the great alliance that suddenly made it all work? And once again, a warning here, we're going to be a little bit California and a little bit San Francisco focused, because that's where our aspect of the story came from and our contributions came from. That is not to deny the fact or to trivialize the fact that this is a struggle that has taken place in Oregon and Washington and across the West Coast for a good 20 or 30 years now, with a lot of great people doing a lot of great contributing. As I said, my name is John Entwistle, and I'm addressing you here from the Cannabis Museum in San Francisco. And I want to go back to the days of Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk was an amazing man. He was the first elected gay man to be elected to a real Board of Supervisors post in San Francisco, which is a huge deal. This is elected office. This is a very hotly contested office in a town that had been traditionally homophobic. And this is the power structure of that town. So for Harvey to be elected in San Francisco was an enormous, enormous thing. And how that came to be is a great story. San Francisco had been working with what we call local. We changed the election process in town. Prior to recent years, the way it was done was citywide. The 11 supervisors were elected on a citywide basis. Every one of them had to get votes everywhere in the city. And the voters decided that this denied neighborhood power and gave too much power to the downtown scenario. And so what they did is they came up with neighborhood elections, and they roped off the city into districts and created different areas, and each area could elect its own supervisor. Well, one of those areas turned out to be a fusion of two very famous neighborhoods in San Francisco. One is the Castro, where all the gay guys came in the early 1970s, the late 1960s. And the other is, this was gay Mecca. And the other is the Haight-Ashbury, which was hippie Mecca. This is where all the hippies came. And, a lot of great rock and roll bands came out of that area, and a lot of great culture came out of that area. And these two neighborhoods just happened to be right next to each other in San Francisco. They adjoined, and they became fused politically for a number of years there, and had the wonderful process of deciding who was going to be their elected supervisor of the Board of Supes. And it wasn't the outcome was not a given. Okay, there were great guys on both sides. There was a very great gay activist by the name of Rick Stokes, who was certainly a very strong contender from the Castro side of the fence. But the problem was Rick really didn't appeal very strongly to the hippies in the Haight-Ashbury. He was kind of just a little too, too stiff, a little too uptight, didn't smoke pot, wasn't a hippie, didn't have long hair. And, otherwise, he was a great guy. Rick had actually been part of the civil rights movement and done great things for the gay movement and for the gay people, but he wasn't this destiny. It wasn't his time. And the other side of the area, you had Terence Hallinan. Terence was a young guy. Terence was a young, straight, very hip civil rights fighter, lawyer, up and coming. He did make it to the Board of Supervisors later in his life and was a great supervisor and a dear friend of all of ours. But back then, the problem was he was too straight. And, it was just too straight. There's no way, the gay guys were going to go for this guy. And, it was just too ridiculous. Then along comes Harvey. And Harvey was a long-haired, pot-smoking, gay hippie. He was the perfect guy. He appealed to both camps right away. The potential to get votes from both camps was there. And it took a little doing. It took 3 runs. But Harvey eventually became the first elected supervisor. And that was a combination of gay and straight voters standing together in this area. I think you see where I'm going with this. This is I would say, the very beginning of the intersectionality, if you will, where we're seeing a fusion here of an odd alliance that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. It was geographically catalyzed here in San Francisco, and it's an odd alliance for sure, but a beautiful alliance that was its first achievement, and it did not stop there. At the same time, there's a great movement to legalize cannabis going on, and Harvey was part of that. Dennis Peron was a big part of that. My husband, who had started the Island Restaurant and was organizing, he'd been busted so many times for selling cannabis, and he had fought so hard to get it legalized. He had just done an initiative in the late 1970s called Prop W, and Harvey was committed to seeing that enforced, and they assassinated Harvey Milk literally 1 year into his term. And literally, just a month or so after Prop W was passed. History can be very, very cold. But the interesting thing about this is that the early movement, okay, so you've got this beautiful coalition of people who came together to elect Harvey. Then a few years later, on a statewide level, we had Proposition 19. This is the one in 1972. It was a very idealistic legalize it measure that was basically put out by a whole lot of people. Gordon Brownell from Normal, with California Normal, was one of the main forces behind that. And he brought together some very talented people. Dennis was part of that effort and learned a lot from it. That really blew his mind, actually. It really opened his mind up to what you can do with that process. And so it was a legalize it. It was a very optimistic, let's legalize it in the state of California kind of initiative. And so unsurprisingly, being 1972, it didn't pass, but it did get a lot of votes in certain places. And San Francisco was one of those places. No shock there. So Dennis, being a proud gay man and an outstanding pot dealer and a guy looking to make a change in the pot laws, and in San Francisco, we have some of the most powerful legislators in the state of California. We had Willie Brown on the up and up. We had Moscone. And because of our monetary position in California and the businesses being based out of here, we've always had disproportionate power in the state assembly and the state legislature. So in 1974, 1975, Dennis went to those guys and he pointed out to them that their voters, the same voters that were voted for them and elected them, had just, by a plurality, by a majority, demanded the legalization of cannabis. And here it is, cannabis is still a felony. If you smoke a joint, you could be put in jail for a year. And Dennis made the case, and he sold it. And and Willie Brown and Moscone and these guys, they took it to Sacramento, and they passed the Moscone Act, which was extremely important for all of us for all time, because it took cannabis from being a felony to being a misdemeanor for under an ounce possession. This made a big difference in everybody's life from that point on. And this was done by a gay man, you see, carrying on the movement of the marijuana community, you see. So the marriage continues, the waltz continues, if you will. As we go forward, we in San Francisco, we became the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic. History is it's always throwing you a curve. It's always throwing something at you. Just as you get into the straightaway and everything looks great, boom, another curve, another detour, another thing comes up. It's the nature of life. We're always climbing hurdles. The AIDS epidemic was a serious, terrible thing. It came at a time when, everything should have been going just great. The gay community had made some tremendous civil rights advances, attained a lot of power, come out of the closet completely. And suddenly this terrible disease comes along and literally kills just enormous numbers of people right off the top. Kills them dead and makes another wave sicker than hell and continues to spread. And this becomes the news of the day. This becomes the thing that everybody is focused on doing. And in this climate, a lot of great activism occurred. And in this climate, it turned out that cannabis was a really great thing. Cannabis really helped people with AIDS. It addressed the AIDS wasting syndrome. It addressed a lot of the muscle neuropathy issues. Excuse me. And it addressed very directly anything to do with the stomach, including the wasting, the diet, and as well as the depression. So just off the top of my head, there's a couple of things I recall that, and it helped a lot of people in a very direct and very positive way. The problem is it was still illegal to buy it, sell it, distribute it. Brownie Mary was underground for a long period of time there, for doing that. And she was doing it successfully, but doing it underground because she did not want to get caught, because she knew that if they caught her, she would go to jail. This is for doing something that, we, in hindsight, we'd call it the Lord's work for real. But at that time, she did it underground out of fear of going to jail for doing the right thing. And so there was still, we had to address this. And now the community came online in a big way. The resources of the cannabis community and the resources of the gay community were once again 100% fused in the same path, and working on the same issues, the same problems. And this is where, let me look around. There it is. This is where, and I'm showing you an original copy of Proposition 215. And this is where Proposition 215 came from. And what we did was we took this form and we went out, we collected 800,000 signatures. And that was extremely hard to do, as you might imagine. And the voters really liked the option of voting yes on medical cannabis. By that point, they were fully sympathetic to the problem. They understood the issue. And that's where history really made a big change. That's where everything changed. That's where we legalized cannabis, if you really want it. That's where everything changed. Suddenly we were a legitimate force. Suddenly everyone else wanted to do this, and from then on, it was just like dominoes falling one after another, state after state legalized it for medical. And then they went back and, came up with the whole, well, why don't we just let everybody use it? I'm going to take just a second and close this door because we're getting some sounds in the background that might interfere with us. So just give me a moment here. There we go. Never a dull moment in the big city here. Hold on half a second here now. So that's basically where we're looking at it historically. What we're saying here is that all the efforts that have, in many occasions, this coalition of cannabis users and the gay community, is unusual, and very different, yet very similar groups of people. When they work together, we've been able to change the world, and we've been able to do it in our own way, in a way that's very unique. And I think we can look back and be very proud of, be very pleased with ourselves about what we've achieved and how we've achieved it. I think going forward, though, it's far from over. You see, that's the big thing here, is we cannot be complacent. Victories are not always won right on the finish line. Sometimes there's an inertia that continues on past the technical change. A real great example of this would be the abortion, the question of a woman's right to choose whether to carry a child to birth or not. And, it's a pretty fundamental choice, what goes on inside of your body. And it's been settled in court completely. And yet we see there's people fighting to change those court decisions. There's people fighting it across the board right up to this day. And the explanation for that is it's cultural. You get it? These folks are what they are. And, their bias comes from somewhere that's not, it's not necessarily a logical bias. And those of us in the gay community and the bisexual, transgender, lesbian, the whole list of non-binary queer community, we struggle with this because going back to Pilgrim Rock, this country has had a dysfunctional relationship with sex. So there's nothing new here. And if you say, you're part of a community that, is sexually different than the Puritans, well, right there, you're going to find out how they feel about that. And they don't change their feelings just because the law changes, you see it. So we've always had to struggle with that and overcome that. And the same applies to the cannabis community. I mean, yeah, we changed the law, but that doesn't change the fact that there's a long history of bias against us. And a lot of people aren't really sure about that. We're still an alcohol-based society, you see. And so, going forward, we have to be careful that those biases, those prejudices don't reemerge and don't take the form of laws or legislation or repression against us funded by the state. That can be a big problem. The New York Times just recently was calling for more enforcement of pot laws, going so far as to say Nixon was right. I mean, my God almighty, and drug laws. And this is a big mistake that we don't want to be repeating. We have to look and to fight that, we're going to have to be advocates. We're going to have to be loud. We're going to have to be vocal, and we're going to have to be very focused. We can't be wishy-washy going forward. Focused. And for us as a community to do that, there's a lot of challenges to that because, today you have to put things in context. This is not the 70s. We are not the baby boom. We don't have those kind of numbers now, and we don't have that kind of music. We are today. We are the people of today, and we have to deal with the hand that we've been dealt with today. And we have to use that hand, and going forward, figure out a way to legalize cannabis and continue this legalization thing such that it works. We don't want to end up with laws like we have in California today, and we certainly don't want to end up with laws like that at the federal level that claim to be pro us, but in reality regulate us so much that they criminalize us. You don't want that. You don't want that. Right now we have an effort at the federal level that's being put forward, that the MORE Act, for example, that certainly there's some nice things one could say about such a thing, but a 25% federal tax, that they really intend to collect, enforced by the Treasury Department of the United States, and that's not the kind of help we need, folks. And the history of that type of assistance is terrible. Terrible. The last time they passed a tax act at the federal level, for the same reason as they're doing it now. It was to give us a hard time. It wasn't to help us out of any troubles going forward. The same thing in California, the industry is saying, look, we're getting regulated to death, we're getting taxed to death, and we're getting outcompeted by the black market. So the government turns around and says, oh, well, we'll go bust all those guys in the black market and keep regulating and taxing you to death. I don't know, if they're getting the whole message here. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to be very clear going forward that we don't want to be killed with red tape. We don't want to be taxed to death. We want cannabis recognized as what it is, a great thing that should be freely available to all people. And we want recognition for the fact that when cannabis is available to all people, that it performs in the marketplace, that it does something really good for all of us. You get it? That it actually helps make the world a better place. And let me give you an example of that. When you put cannabis out there and you put it out there at a reasonable price, and you make a good, high quality cannabis product available to everybody, so you can just go out and get it really easily. Okay. Like for example, I was at the Hard Rock Cafe. Now that dates me. I know we haven't been in Vegas and they closed the place down, but it was open a few years ago. And I looked out my window and I could see literally across the street, there was a big old store, a MedMen, selling cannabis. Now, I walked across the street and bought a jar, and it was just great. Now, the problem was the price, of course. We have to work on that. $80 for a tiny little bit of cannabis ain't going to, that's not going to work, guys. But the fact that you could just walk across the street and there's a sign bigger than your, literally bigger than your house that says marijuana here, that's a big step forward. And you can do that. And when you can do that, you might say to yourself, why should I go to the bar? I'm going to go to that store across the street and I'm going to buy me some really good green buds. I'm not going to the bar today. And, for some of us, that's a really big thing. That's a giant thing. And it's something we should celebrate. And I'm not talking just a few of us. I'm talking a lot of us. You see, and that's just one of them. So and the benefits accrue. So a lot of people that are older and they're living on a fixed income and they have not got a lot of money. And cannabis is a really great thing. And in your older years, it would be a blessing to have an unlimited supply of really high quality cannabis at a really low price that you can afford no matter what. That won't go up, a price that will only go down, a quality that will only go up. That's what we need to be working for. That's what we want to give our senior citizens, because those folks are living on fixed incomes. They, their income may not be enough for $80 eighths or even 40 or 50 or 30 or 20. We got to get this down to the floor, guys, and get this stuff available to a lot of people super cheap for the right reasons, not so that I can make money, not so that my cousin can make $1 million, not so that somebody can make, money selling it. But we have to think about the millions and millions and millions of people that need to be able to buy this stuff. Those are the people we need to be focusing on, the purchasers, the consumers, the folks that use cannabis. That's got to be the top of our list. Every day we got to wake up and we got to say to ourselves, what are we doing to help the people that need access to cannabis? And we have to think big. We have to think internationally. Right now, if you go to the supermarket, your oranges could be coming from anywhere in the world. And you really don't. That's a wonderful thing, because it means that you have fresh orange juice right now. Not orange juice made from oranges, 6 months ago, but made just recently. And many, many, many things work like this. The tobacco market, for example, works exactly like that. It's sourcing from all over the world. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, by the way, because yes, it might be cheaper, but you also have to worry about consistency and quality and all kinds of issues like that. So it balances out. But what we need is a worldwide crop. We need to be selling our crop internationally during the times when it's coming in, and we need to be importing from other countries during the times when our crop is fallow and we're waiting for the next growing season. That's reasonable. That's how the world works. So this is the future we have to be aiming for. We have to think like other industries. We have to think, how do we get our product to the consumer for the lowest price possible, at the highest quality, And why do we want to do that? We want to do that because it produces a better country to live in, a country where people can get to work, can enjoy good health, and enjoy a good cannabis cigarette at the end of the day, or at the beginning if they feel like it. So I think that's the future we're all aiming for. But we got to stay on track. And the question is, are we being effective in our advocacy? And I think we have to always ask ourselves that. We need to look at the social media, and we have to say, why are we getting censored on some of these platforms? And is that reasonable for them to be doing that to us, especially in consideration of the fact that there is legislation currently being debated in Congress and in the Senate that affects us directly. And it's about cannabis. And yet Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all these major platforms are interfering with our ability to have this discussion online in the manner that we ought to be having. And that's not right. That's not friendly. And it doesn't augur well for us. Another issue, when we watch television and we watch TV shows, yet, there's a big industry in product placement. And the fact that almost, most of these shows end up with the hero, consuming an alcoholic beverage at the high point of the show in celebration of their great victory or whatever, it's not an accident. These alcohol companies pay tremendous amounts of money for that to happen. And the question is, how are we going to make that happen? We need to see our product on TV. It's part of America. That's the River Jordan. It's the river that runs through our country, and we need to be a part of it. We need to be on popular culture. We have to be properly presented. And I don't think we're the only group out there that's unhappy with our portrayal on the popular, on television and popular media. But it's important, and we have to, our advocates and the people that fight for us, this is part of what we're fighting for. How we're presented in the popular media. This just gives you a hint. There's other issues. Yeah, I could go on all night and all day on this, but we have to be thinking realistically and honestly, and shamelessly. We're fighting for a better world, damn it, and we got to get there, and we got to get there fast. So you got to ask ourselves: are we doing enough every day? Am I doing enough to make this happen? I think on that happy note, Neil, I'm gonna thank you guys for having me here, and I wish you good luck on the rest of the conference. And I want to thank the people of Washington State and all of you guys, because you've been part of this for a long time. I remember when it was Joanna McKee and her dogs up there fighting for this cause. It goes way, way back, and Washington State has always been a big part of this, and will always continue to be a big part of this going forward. So once again, thank you for everything.